Okay, hi everybody again, and this is we're doing this video commentary number 6 on a treatise on white magic, and we're into the introduction, which is getting more complex. I think very soon he's going to give us quite a in-depth look at spirit, soul, and body. So we have been dealing with triplicities, basically, and the different aspects of man by means of which he can analogize towards larger structures in whom he lives and moves and has his being. We've been dealing with the 3 and 1 and the 1 and 3, the central energy of spirit, the coordinating force of soul, and that which these two use, namely the objective form. And then he's applied the triplicity to a number of different areas of learning, such as education, the different philosophies, the different laws, religion. Always the triplicities do apply. So he's acquainting us with these triplicities right here, and we will move on from page 21. All right. Excuse me. In dealing with the triplicities so often used when speaking of deity, such as spirit, soul, and body, life, consciousness, and form, father, son, mother, etc. They're everywhere in all these philosophies, the Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma, and so forth. It is of value to remember that they refer to differentiations of the one life, and that the more of these triplicities with which one can familiarize oneself, the more will one be en rapport with a wider circle of men, of human beings. That's very interesting because sometimes we hold on to our triplicities as if they were found only in our particular religion or philosophy or world outlook. And that's why the secret doctrine is so valuable, because it's shown triplicities, it's shown a series of 5s and 7s that are found in many of the world educational, philosophical, religious traditions. And so we no longer have that exclusive point of view that ours is the only system which is demonstrating these collections, the 3, the 5, the 7, the 9, the 12, And then we can be in rapport with a wider circle of men when we have commonalities with their thinking. We can speak to each other and we can relate in an understanding manner. But when one is dealing with things occult and subjective, and when the subject about which one writes deals with the undefinable, then difficulty is encountered, because let's just say that the mind of man is not yet the higher mind and not yet the abstract mind. Okay, it is okay. It is no difficult matter to describe a man's personal appearance, his clothing, his form, and the things with which he is surrounded. Okay, and these are, what should we say, concretions, with which the average mind is accustomed to deal. Language suffices satisfactorily to deal with the concrete and with the world of form. But when one endeavors to convey an idea of his quality, character, and nature, one is immediately faced with the problem of the unknown, with that undefinable, unseen part which we sense, but which remains in a large sense unrevealed and unrealized even by the man himself. How shall we describe him? Through the medium of language. And obviously, our languages have to be enriched and rendered more subtle and pliable. Alice Bailey was always complaining about English, that it was that, inelastic tongue. But I suppose when we think about Sanskrit, and maybe there are other even more refined languages, but Sanskrit is considered to be the language of the gods, we have greater flexibility and sensitivity and ability to describe the abstract. But we have to help modern language to evolve in that way, and also our telepathic languages, which are evolving, where we can send the images via our internal television to the internal television of another. These will make our understanding deeper, things that maybe normal words sounding in a normal way cannot do. Okay. Quality and character. Well, and that's where poetry enters, and drama and the arts, this ability to somewhat describe the intangible. But when it comes to occultism, the problem goes even deeper. We're not just dealing with the subtle bodies of a man's emotions or his inner Kamamanus or his inner psyche. We're not simply dealing with the thoughts of his mind. We have to deal with his soul nature, which is the product of many lives. And how shall we describe that, which cannot really be contained entirely by his present ray structure or by his horoscope, his present horoscope. He's so much more than his present horoscope will indicate, because his inner qualities are built upon the life experience using many horoscopes, many astrological charts. Okay, so how shall we describe him through the medium of language, and how shall we touch upon these more subtle factors in the human being? If this is so, how much greater is the difficulty when we seek through words to express the inexpressible sum total of which the terms spirit, soul, and body are regarded as the main component definitions. Maybe there are others. So we move from moving from concretions to subtleties to okay, if I could only spell right, subtleties to spiritual subtleties. Which are extremely intangible. How shall we define that undefinable life that men have, for the sake of understanding, limited and separated into a trinity of aspects or persons, calling the whole by the name of God, describing life, God, being, the substratum, the all-pervading factor. How shall we describe this? And we run right into the fact that our methods of symbolic apprehension are not yet sophisticated enough to describe those levels of energy and vibration with which we are now just learning to come in contact. Okay, So, in fact, the tendency of man is to concretize the abstract, and thus lose much of the nature of that which is abstract. And this has been the case with religions. They've become sadly concrete. One book by a Tibetan scholar, practitioner, I can't remember his name, but the name of the title struck me, and I saw it long ago, 30 years, 40 years ago, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, or cutting through the materialism which shows itself when we describe various religions and the fields which they try to present to our understanding. Heaven, for instance. Heaven has been sadly concretized, and well, maybe hell is quite concrete, being for the average believer on the seventh subplane of the astral plane, quite concrete, I suppose. But the third heaven, the seventh heaven that St. Paul talked about, how to describe those matters. DK says great mistakes were made, even in apprehending the words of St. Paul, that there is the third heaven as it reflects the seventh. What could people at that stage of education, in which they found themselves 2,000 years ago, do with such a statement? All right. Yet, where this differentiation of God into a Trinity is universal and age-long in use, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma, and the many other names of the three persons, the first, second, and third persons of the great deity, where every people, ancient and modern, employ the same triplicity of ideation to express an intuitive realization, there is warrant for the usage. In other words, he is justifying the use of triplicities to describe God, even though every Trinity minimizes God's nature. Or shall we say God's true nature. The concretization of the idea of God is a great problem, and according to our education and the scope of our minds, so we limit our conception of deity, making God in our own image, and then, especially in the early days, try to force that image upon others, converting them by the sword as if their belief in the same thing we believe somehow is less threatening than a situation in which they held a different belief. Then we might begin to doubt our own limited belief, and certainly for people who are very limited in their belief structure, that would be threatening. That someday we may think and express the truth differently may indeed be so. But for the average thinker of today, the terms spirit, soul, and body, Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, and Mother, whether we differentiate Holy Ghost or Holy Spirit from Mother or not, stand for the aggregate of divine manifestation, both in the deity of the universe and in that lesser divinity, man himself. Well, if we really pay attention here, DK is telling us that man is divine. As this treatise is intended for the thinking human being and not for the crystallized theologians or the theoretically biased scientists, we will adhere to the well-used terminology and seek to understand what has lain back of the phrases in which man has sought to explain God himself. Yes, some of the great sins, some of the great limitations, the curtailment of the scope of spirit have to do with the concretization of the idea of God. I guess so many of us are now beyond the idea of an old man with a long white beard, although in art he is sometimes portrayed that way, ruling all from heaven. We are beyond that, and when you get into the really, really sophisticated minds, I recall, and I can't find it easily, but Buckminster Fuller's definition of God. It is a very creative statement and reflects his own mind rather than the simplistic mind of the unthinking believer. God is spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth, states one of the scriptures of the world. How do you worship in spirit? Well, first of all, you have to identify yourself as a spirit at one with God, the Spirit. Man, and of course, the truth shall set you free, and true freedom is found in identification as God. Nothing wrong with this word. It is a popular word. Sometimes we try to evade it, go around it, define it in many, many different ways, but we can come back to it with a more heartfelt, sensitive, sophisticated conception. Matter of fact, one of the great methods of education in the world might be to sensitize a man or human beings in their definition of God, to render that definition more sensitive to the abstract realms where higher intensities of God can be found. Note that phrase, higher intensities of God. We can find God anywhere. On the dense physical plane, we find relatively low intensities of that being. Shall we call it the God of the universe, or that's the God of the planet, God of the solar system, but different planes evidence different intensities of God. I'll just say different planes evidence different intensities of God. Man became a living soul is another statement, is to be found in another place in the same scripture. And of course, here we might talk about individualization, I-N-D-I-Z, individualization, and gradually the soul nature emerges, and man is no longer animal man. And another statement, I pray God, your whole spirit and soul and body may be preserved blameless, said a great initiate of the Great White Lodge. And I'm trying to think about who said that. Was that the Christ himself, or was it St. Paul, or was it another? But he calls him not just an initiate of the White Lodge, but a great initiate. So maybe maybe the whole, maybe Christ himself. But let's see if we can find this. Just, let's see here. Oh, goodness. All right, let's try this and see if searching for this may be preserved blameless. I pray God, your Holy Spirit and soul. All right, let's try that. Thessalonians, and the very God of peace sanctify you wholly, and I pray God, your whole spirit and soul and body may be preserved blameless to the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. It seems that it would not be Jesus or the Christ working through him who said this. Maybe this is more Paul, but I'm not sure that I'm going to find this. There's various biblical studies here showing how the sixth ray will morph the Apostle Paul. Okay, looks like it. Bible studies and Apostle Paul's first letters. It seems to be the case. Well, anyway, we can look this up and be more sure of it, but suffice it to say, it's considered to be a statement by a great initiate. And even, we can imagine that the body would have to be preserved blameless, but then what about the soul? Is there any evil in the soul? Probably not, only lack of development. What about the spirit? Well, maybe the spirit as it expresses, but the spirit itself is pure and clean and undefiled and undivided. So we need to interpret this carefully. I pray God your whole spirit and soul may be preserved blameless, said a great initiate of the Great White Lodge. And the greatest of them all, yet present with us in physical form on earth. So this is probably in distinction from who said the previous sentence, repeated the words of an earlier sage when he said, I have said ye are gods, and ye are all children of the Most High. Again, is that, okay, it strikes me as being Paul, know ye not that ye are gods, but maybe the Christ said this as well. So let's see if I can find this. Okay. Come. All right. Try this. Open in a new tab, Google, and this is, I've said ye all gods, and you're all gods of the Most High, American Standard Bible. Okay, and in the Psalms we find this too. Interesting. All right. Well, here is the word, and I don't really have time to find the exact source, King James Version, and it seems that either Christ or St. Paul has said this. I know Paul is reputed to have said, know ye not, ye are gods. All right. In these words, the triplicity of man, his divinity, and his relationship to the life in whom he lives and moves and has his being is touched upon from the Christian standpoint, and all the great religions deal in analogous phrases with that relationship. And think about that we are not only gods, we are emanations of the one God, and we are, in essence, that one God of which the apparent we is the emanation, or are the emanations. We seem to be limited, we are, in time and space, but also we are not. If we retract sufficiently and drop our identifications, drop our lesser identifications, we find that we are the one God who has emanated our apparent self, which is limited. Okay, now we get into this rather demanding section where spirit, life, and energy are first considered, and then the soul, and then the personality, bodily form. So let's see what we can do with this idea of spirit. Okay. The word spirit, let me get my bracket there. All right, I see that I'm having a little trouble here and somehow have identified. All right, let's see if that will work. All right, this is the bracket, and hopefully there we go. The word spirit is applied to that undefinable, elusive, essential impulse or life, which is the cause of all manifestation. So spirit and life and being are largely equivalent. The cause of all manifestation, undefinable, and that's interesting because every time you define and limit, you have worked against the infinite spirit, with all capitals, you might say. Elusive because it is not formal and is without boundary. Essential, it cannot be further reduced. And it is that out of which all things come, the primary impulse, out of which all identifiable things, all perceptions, arise. It is the breath of life. When we think of breath, we think of that which moves something. It is, sound is not produced unless the breath is there first. It is the breath of life. Okay. Spirit as the breath of life, and is that rhythmic inflow of vital energy which manifests in its turn as the attractive force, as the consciousness or soul, and is the sum of sum total of atomic substance. So here the second and the third aspects are mentioned as derivative from spirit, or of spirit. He is defining, but obviously all definitions do finally fall short. It is the correspondence in the great existence or macrocosm of that which in the little existence or microcosm is the vital inspiring factor, which we call the life of man, the vital inspiring factor. It brings life or to all perceptions, and it animates all perceptions. I'm calling a thing a self-perception. All things within our content of consciousness are ultimately self-perceptions, and they are sustained and animated, brought into being by spirit. This is indicated by the breath in the body, which is abstracted or withdrawn when the life has run its course, and then the form loses its coherence and its ability to move as a unit. Disintegration sets in when life or spirit is withdrawn. But being, of course, still exists. Whatever is perceived is, in the sense that of its being. Let's see. I want to get rid of that for the moment. And get rid of that. Biblical study. Well, it's all on its way, you know. It's all on the way. And eventually those who study on the sixth ray will study on the second and have a larger point of view. So in the great existence or macrocosm, it is that of which it is the correspondence in the great existence or macrocosm of that which in the little existence or microcosm is the vital, inspiring factor. It is the life which sustains. Okay, we might say the life which brings into being and sustains that which is brought into being, and withdraws the possibility of coherence at the end of the cycle. Okay. What this something is, who shall say? Exactly. We make our attempts and we use words that are meaningful to ourselves and perhaps to some others, but we cannot delude ourselves into thinking that we are really grasping the essence of life, of spirit, of being, of the ultimately infinite and indefinable. We trace it back to the soul or consciousness aspect, and from the soul to the spirit, as we call the three aspects of the one breath. Very interesting. There is the form, the soul, and the spirit. And these are three aspects of the one breath. The form, soul, and spirit are three aspects of the one breath. The breath of life which brings into being. But what these words really signify, who has the courage to declare? And that is really interesting. What a way to express it. Or shall it be, who has the foolishness to declare what they really, really mean? Obviously, we are trying to symbolize with our organized sounds, we call words and sentences and so forth, that which is essentially only itself and unlimited and indefinable. We call this unknown something by differing names according to our particular school of thought. We seek to express it in words and end by calling it spirit, the one life, the monad, energy. But DK is under no illusions here, according to your school of thought. So you will name it, and that does not necessarily take you any closer to deeply understanding it and identifying as it. The naming of a thing is good and is the beginning because it shows that you have isolated it and identified it as existing, but the name is not the thing, and the map is not the territory, and the menu is not the meal. Again, we must remember that understanding as to the nature of this one life is purely relative. And I dare say that even the greatest being in our cosmos, the universal logos, is in a way infinitely removed from a true understanding of spirit as the one extra universal life. Those who are engrossed in the form side of existence think in terms of physical vitality, of feeling, impulse, or of mental force, and do not pass beyond that unified life consciousness of which all the above are differentiations. We might say they are trapped within the WI. Oh, United States. I'm not going to get very far there. I have to have the United Kingdom set as default. Yes, and go. Within. They are trapped within their attention to the personality. So, and the word is engrossed. They are trapped in heavy layers of matter. They are deeply immersed in objectivity and are cribbed, cabined, and confined by their limited perception. Those, again, who are interested in the more metaphysical approach and in the soul life more than the form aspect, express their concept in terms of soul manifestation, which is inclusive and unitive and deals with harmonious and right relation, and passing beyond the personal selfish reactions of the body nature. Think in terms of life, in terms of quality. Those are the fundamental distinctions in vibratory rate and in color and sound and so forth, of group will or power, group coordination or love wisdom, and the group intelligence or knowledge, covering all by the generic term brotherhood. So that's another step to think in terms of relations and in terms of unity. Metaphysics brings us to this, and our instinctive selfishness comes to an end. But even that is found to be separative. In other words, it's not totally homogeneous, synthesized, one, through the separation into larger units than the lower is capable of grasping. Even that is separative. It is, well, let's put it like this. It is separative, though unitive. Oneness is not yet known. Complete, homogeneous oneness is not yet known. Through the separation into larger units than the lower is capable of grasping. Therefore, the initiate, especially after the third initiation, begins to think even more synthetically and to express truth to himself in terms of spirit, life, and one. And some of what we're trying to do in our identify as being group, intermediately, that's not the word, but occasionally writing and occasionally speaking, intermittently is what we want to say. Such a group is dealing with spirit, life, and the one, even though, let us say, speculatively. Therefore, the initiate, especially after the third initiation begins, and maybe partially before, but especially after, begins to express truth to himself, at least at first, to himself and then to others, in terms of spirit, life, and the one. These terms mean to him something significant, but something so far removed from the concept of ordinary thinking humanity that it is needless for me to enlarge further upon it. This is a practical book, and so many of us think as humanity thinks and are subject to the limitations of such thought. Well, so those of us who are speaking of the one, of spirit, of life, have to realize that the object, or maybe subject, of our discussion is far removed from the consideration of the average human being. For me, that has been quite a lesson. You know how it is when you begin, you think that maybe everybody thinks more or less your way, or at least is within range of apprehending what you're thinking about. But it turns out that that's not the case, and in many respects they couldn't care less, just the way we have ceased to care about so many of the concretions which seem to absorb the full attention of many, many human beings. So we have to move even beyond unity. We must move beyond unity into oneness. It's very clear. Must move beyond the unity of the soul into the oneness of the spirit, life, and spirit and life. And you know, you might say, well, what is your object for so doing? And I would just say identificatory participation in and as all things. That is the great reward. Maybe I write it. The reward for so doing is identificatory participation in and as all things, i.e., all perceptions. There's nothing that we see or register that we are not. And this is a perception or an apperception that has to deepen. It's really an infuception, I call it. It has to deepen, and it deepens with the opening of the heart, deepens with the opening of the heart and the head. Finally, it is a monadic apprehension. If we are on our way to the monad, to finding out what it is, we have to approach through identification. At least, certainly those upon the second ray do, but I think it's a more general statement. We have to approach through identification. This brings me to a point that should be dealt with here prior to any further expansion of our subject. In the treatise on cosmic fire and in the above passage, it frequently appears that teaching is carried forward to a certain point and then dropped with the statement that, owing to the point in evolution of the average man, his reaction to truth and the reaction of the disciple student or the initiate will differ. So this is a statement that we oftentimes reach and find that we are unable to carry the discussion further. I mean, we have perhaps as disciples less limitation upon our understanding than the average personally focused individual, but still there are great limitations to our understanding, and even the masters have their limitations and are amused by how their disciples overestimate them, and our planetary logos has its limitations, and the solar logos, and on until we reach the universal logos, which in my view is still an infinitesimal and has its limitations when compared with absolute infinity of the extra universal life. By extra, I mean that which is outside of, apparently. Okay, so this is necessarily so. Each will read into the words his own state of consciousness and will fail to interpret in terms of the more advanced reaction of those on a higher stage of the ladder of evolution. So what is to be grasped? What is to be grasped by the consciousness is variable according to the elevation of that consciousness. The average reader, however, objects to being forced to recognize wider points of view than his own, and the phraseology which says, quote, "It is needless to enlarge on this, for it would only be understood by the initiate," yeah, serves to aggravate him, tends to make him believe that evasion is intended, and that the writer, having gotten out of his depth, is seeking to save his face by some such statement. all of these interpretations are misapprehensions. The truth is not at all as imagined here. Just as a scientific treatise would prove meaningless and a mere jumble of words to the average grammar school child, but would carry a clear definition and meaning to experts in the subject owing to training and mental development, so there are those to whom the subject of the soul and its nature, as dealt with in such an instruction as this, is as clear and lucid as current literature is to the average reader. I think I'll put that in the bestsellers, as you call them, to the general public. Even in those days, bestsellers were to be found, and this is written in the late 20s and early 30s. Equally, though fewer in number, there are those advanced souls to whom the spirit and its nature is also a rational and understandable subject, to be appreciated and comprehended through the medium of the soul and its powers, just as it is possible to arrive at an understanding of the soul through the medium of the mind correctly employed. So the well-trained, immediately inferior vehicle or center is used to understand the immediately superior center or vehicle. So we use the mind to understand the soul. We use the soul to understand the spirit. What do we use the spirit to understand? Perhaps the greater forms of life in which spirit is manifesting, perhaps the ones, it's a plural, in whom we live and move and have our being. And as the scope of those ones expands, our measurement becomes greatly reduced until, at first we're like a cell, that may be like a molecule, then like an atom, then like a subatomic particle. Who knows how confined we become in comparison with the vast life. We as an emanation, what are we to the universal logos? And then, of course, in the Bible we have, what is man that thou art mindful of him? I guess we all run into our question like that based on proportional understanding of the universe. On a lower level altogether, we know it is easy to understand the nature of the physical body through a study in the right use of the desire nature. And in this case, we're using a higher center of energy to understand a lower. It is a form of pride and a refusal to recognize one's temporary limitations, because we are the monad in extension and we are an emanation of the one life, so we are temporarily limited. One's temporary limitations that awakens in readers a dislike for phrases which aptly and truly say, when you are further developed, you will understand the above. This should be made clear. So we need humility in our reading of occult instruction. And humility is not so readily found among beginners, which really we are. Yeah, we have to think that if we were truly members of the hierarchy and initiates of high degree and even masters, we would not be spoken to in this manner. But of course, such a sentence would also be true even of a solo logos. When you are further developed, says the one about whom naught may be said, to the solo logos, you will understand the above. So all unfoldment is gradual in time and space. To the master of the wisdom, the nature of the spirit, or that positive center of life, which every form hides, is no more a mystery than is the nature of the soul to the esoteric psychologist. Okay. The master of the wisdom is in direct touch with the monad, is not totally identified as the monad on the sixth subplane from below, the second from above, but is in close touch. And this more intimate contact with the monad actually begins, we are told, at the fourth initiation. The source of the one life, the plane or state from which that life emanates, is the great hidden mystery to the members of hierarchy of adepts. Okay, now the source, what is it? As found on the cosmic monadic plane, or is that source the universal logos itself, which has reached the stage of master of the wisdom through many, many lessening emanations? The nature of spirit, well, look, as esoteric psychologists in the making, we have to understand the nature of soul, and he's given us a dual curriculum, so we even have to learn something about the spirit and the will and the spirit. The nature of spirit, its quality and type of cosmic energy, is rate of vibration. Okay, so this is interesting. Does spirit have a rate of vibration? Well, not if spirit is pure being, but then how the word spirit is used appears to be less than pure being. I think pure being has no vibration whatsoever. And that is a debatable and interesting point. Okay, the nature of spirit, its quality and type of cosmic energy, its rate of vibration, and its basic cosmic differentiations are the study of initiates above the third degree and the subject of their investigations. All right, well, we all have our curricula to deal with, and the curricula do not stop after we achieve the higher initiations. If even planetary logos is learning, and the solar logos and so forth, there's no being that is not learning. And is the universal logos learning? Well, it's learning how to bring its expression to fulfillment. Is the absolute deity learning? Well, since it is essentially absolute infinity, you wonder whether there can be any learning at all in that stateless state which contains as actuality, or maybe potentiality, all possibility. Right, but the initiates of high degree are learning in this way. They bring to that study a fully developed intuition. In other words, the Antikarana has taken them into Buddhi, plus that mental interpretive capacity which their cycle of incarnation, really of many incarnations, has developed. This is really a wonderful introduction. I'm re-appreciating it. They employ the awakened and developed inner light of their souls to interpret and comprehend that life which, divorced from the world of form, persists on the higher levels of consciousness and penetrates into our solar system from some exterior center of being. So this life may be the life of the cosmic logos, or of the one about whom naught may be said, but on and up, so to speak. It goes and rises until the one being of cosmos is reached, which is not yet the one being, ultimate being, which is extra cosmic and which can never fully manifest in any cosmos, although since it is indivisible, you might even think that a grain of sand would have the full manifestation of absolute infinity, and that's a terribly paradoxical thought. So these initiates, they throw this light which is in them and which they manipulate and use. They can manipulate matter, and light is the source of matter, and they can manipulate light and for the purposes of revelation. I'll put it like this: for the purposes of revelation in two directions. Therefore, standing as they do in the midmost state and functioning as they choose to function on the plane of the intuition or Buddhi. So they throw this light, which is in them, the light of wisdom, the light of advanced occult knowledge, in which they manipulate and use in two directions. Therefore, standing as they do at the midmost state and functioning as they choose to function on the plane of intuition or Buddhi, this is where the master mostly functions and directs light in two directions, below, into the 18th 21 subplanes, and above into the worlds of Atma, monad, and the sea of fire logoic plane. They cast that light into the world of form and know all things, interpreting all with correctness, undeceived by glamour and illusion, as we are presently deceived. They cast that light into the formless realms of the higher three planes, higher than Buddhi, formless from the standpoint of man in the three worlds below the intuitional plane, but essentially because these worlds are part of the cosmic physical plane, they are still worlds of cosmic form. Our cosmic physical plane is physical, really. It's etheric and densely physical, and so we cannot really call it formless in the cosmic sense, and seek to understand through steady expansive growth the nature and purpose of that which is neither body nor soul, neither force nor matter, but which is the cause of both in universe, and I think, basically what we have here is spirit. Oopsie. Okay. Let's see, what have we got here? All right, let's call this. All right, so basically what we're saying is the masters and the Chohans are attempting the ABCs, really. Whoops, ABCs of understanding spirit or being, although we've already discussed that perhaps being, which is indivisible and non-vibratory, at least in my view, is distinct from spirit. Well, okay, friends, this is then the end of a treatise on white magic video commentary, and that needs to be fixed. VC, and we'll call it video commentary. Replace, yes, 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 okay. And it's number 6. And we began, what, on page 21? And wherever we are now, we are somewhere. We are on page 26, about 5 pages, let's say. And we, beginning of a treatise on white magic, video commentary, number 7, starting from page 26. All right. Well, we have some wonderful clarifications in process. And I begin to realize this, that you don't dare not read what Master DK has written in various of his books, because whatever you read will throw light forward or backward on that which you will read or have read, and will illuminate to a greater extent that which you will read or have read. And if you don't read it all, the maximum illumination of which you may be capable will not appear. Alrighty, onward we go, on to number 7 when we can. See you then.